when a homeless man boldly stepped forward, approaching Barron Trump for just $1. No one in the bustling crowd could have foreseen the incredible chain of events that would soon unfold. What seemed like a small, everyday act of kindness would go on to spark a powerful national movement, heal broken family bonds, and change lives in ways no one could have ever imagined. In a world so often clouded by indifference, their unexpected meeting became a shining beacon of hope and compassion. As the story unraveled, it proved how even the smallest gesture could ripple far beyond its humble beginning, inspiring countless others to embrace the power of kindness and human connection. The city's pulse was relentless. Cars honked, pedestrians wove through the streets, and the air buzzed with the hum of conversation. On the corner of Broad Street and 17th Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, a man sat slumped against the wall of an old convenience store. His clothes, worn and tattered, barely shielded him from the bitter winter wind. Beside him, a piece of cardboard bore the words, "Anything helps. God bless." His name was H.E.D., though few had ever cared to ask. At 42 years old, he had been surviving on the streets for nearly a year. A string of misfortunes had stripped him of everything he once cherished. Each day was a gamble. Sometimes a kind stranger would toss a few coins his way, but more often than not, people simply rushed past, avoiding his gaze. Leonard pulled his beanie tighter and shivered. He watched as shoes of every kind passed by. High heels, sneakers, polished loafers. Then, out of the corner of his eye, something different caught his attention. Just a few feet away, a pair of pristine white sneakers had come to a stop. They weren't just expensive. These were the kind only someone truly young and only the privileged would wear shoes like that. Leonard glanced up, his curiosity piqued. Standing before him was a teenager, tall, unmistakably composed, hands casually tucked into the pockets of a sleek jacket. Squinting against the sunlight, Leonard studied the boy's face. It was familiar, but he couldn't immediately place it. The teenager stood at the corner, scrolling through his phone, completely oblivious to the attention he was drawing. Around them, whispers stirred. Some bystanders even discreetly pulled out their phones, snapping pictures. Leonard hesitated. He rarely initiated conversation unless someone met his gaze first. But something about this boy's presence felt different. Unlike the hurried passers-by, he wasn't rushing. There was a quiet stillness about him, a calm that stood in stark contrast to the city's chaos. Taking a steadying breath, Leonard spoke, his voice dry from the cold. "Hey, young man," he called out, forcing a weak smile. "Could you spare $1?" Mid-scroll, the boy froze. His head tilted slightly, as if making sure he had heard correctly. Slowly, he turned to face Leonard, his expression unreadable, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world around them had slowed to a halt. Leonard braced himself for rejection. He was used to it. But what happened next was anything but ordinary. "What do you need it for?" the boy asked, his voice steady, firm, but not unkind. The question caught Leonard off guard. It wasn't dismissive or condescending. There was weight to it, as though the boy genuinely wanted to understand. Leonard's throat tightened. He hadn't expected an actual conversation. Well, he rubbed his hands together for warmth. A cup of coffee would be nice. Maybe a sandwich if I'm lucky. His voice wavered slightly. Being questioned like this was unsettling, but there was no malice in the boy's tone, just curiosity. The teenager stepped closer, slipping his phone into his pocket, now forgotten. Leonard could feel the stares around him, silent judgment from those who wondered why someone like this kid would waste his time on a man like him. The urge to shrink away, to disappear, gnawed at Leonard, but the boy's unwavering gaze held him there. "What's your name?" the boy asked. Leonard swallowed hard. "Leonard," he murmured, barely above a whisper. The boy nodded, his brow furrowing slightly, as if processing something far deeper than the moment itself. "I'm Barron," he said simply. There was no arrogance in his voice, no hint of self-importance, just a quiet sincerity that caught Leonard off guard. The hum of the city returned, but something in the air had shifted. The space between them now carried an unspoken charge, as though this brief interaction could lead to something far greater. Leonard shifted uneasily on the cold pavement, uncertain of how to respond. Barron's presence was unlike anything he had encountered before. Most people ignored him, diverting their eyes, hurrying past, or at best, tossing a few coins in his direction without a word. But this boy, he had stopped. He wasn't just acknowledging Leonard's existence, he was speaking to him as an equal. Then, to Leonard's astonishment, Barron crouched down to meet him at eye level. The movement sent a jolt of surprise through Leonard. No one had ever done that before. "How long have you been out here?" Barron asked, his tone calm, direct. Leonard hesitated. Sharing his story wasn't something he was used to. People never cared about the why, only the spectacle of his misfortune. But something about Barron's presence was disarming. "Almost a year now," Leonard admitted. "Lost my job after the plant shut down. Then my health went south. Couldn't keep up with rent." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "It's been downhill ever since." Barron listened intently, his eyes narrowing, not in judgment, but in focus. It was a look Leonard wasn't used to, a mix of curiosity and concern, as if the teenager were piecing together a puzzle in his mind. Leonard could feel the weight of the moment shifting. Around them, the crowd had grown still. Whispers floated in the air, people pausing to watch, curiosity flickering in their eyes at the unusual sight before them. The young Trump heir, crouched on the sidewalk beside a homeless man. Barron's voice cut through the noise. "What about family?" he asked. Leonard's jaw tightened. He shook his head. "Don't have much of that anymore," he admitted. "My folks passed away years ago. And my brother? Well, we haven't spoken in ages." A bitter chuckle escaped his lips. "Not much left to lose, when you've already lost it all." Barron stayed silent for a moment, as if carefully weighing Leonard's words. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached into his pocket. Leonard's pulse quickened. He had only asked for $1, just one, but there was something different about Barron's movements, and when his hand emerged, it wasn't holding a single bill, but a crisp $100 note. Leonard blinked in disbelief. "Here," Barron said, extending the bill toward him. "This should cover more than just coffee." Leonard stared at the money, stunned. For a moment, he couldn't move. It wasn't just the amount, it was the gesture itself. "Are you serious?" Leonard finally managed to ask, his voice cracking. "Why would you do that?" Barron shrugged lightly. "Because I can." The simplicity of the answer left Leonard speechless. Before he could find the right words, Barron leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a softer tone. "But listen," he continued, his expression growing more intent. "This isn't just about the money. I need you to promise me something." Leonard's grip on the bill tightened. "What's that?" he asked hesitantly. Barron's gaze held steady, his voice firm. "If I help you today, you've got to help yourself tomorrow. Deal?" Leonard felt a lump rise in his throat. The words hit deeper than he had expected. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone wasn't just handing him a lifeline. They were challenging him to climb out of the hole he had fallen into. He nodded, unable to find the right words. "Good," Barron said, straightening up. He glanced around at the growing crowd, his calm demeanor unfazed by the attention. Leonard, on the other hand, felt his cheeks burn as he realized people were recording the moment on their phones. He wasn't sure how to feel, grateful, embarrassed, or both. Then Barron reached into his pocket again, pulling out a pen and a small notepad. He scribbled something quickly before tearing off a piece of paper and handing it to Leonard. "Go to this address tomorrow morning," he said. "They'll help you out. Tell them Barron sent you." Leonard unfolded the note, his hands trembling slightly. It was the address of a local shelter and resource center, one he had heard of but had always been too proud or too ashamed to visit. "I'll make sure they're expecting you," Barron added, his voice steady. The air around them seemed to shift as Leonard clutched both the paper and the money. This wasn't just kindness. It was hope, a fragile, flickering light in a world that had long been dark. And somehow, deep inside, Leonard knew. This was only the beginning. Leonard sat there, staring at the $100 bill, and Leonard turned the note over in his hands as if it was something foreign, something that didn't quite belong to him. His mind raced, caught somewhere between disbelief and hesitant hope. Barron didn't leave right away. Instead, he stood there, watching Leonard with an intensity that was almost unsettling. It was clear, this wasn't just a simple handout. He was waiting for something. An acknowledgement, a commitment. Leonard swallowed, clearing his throat. His voice wavered. Why do you care?" he asked. "You don't even know me." Barron tilted his head slightly, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Because everyone has a story, Leonard. Yours just hasn't been told yet." He paused, glancing at the small crowd that had begun to gather. Then, with quiet certainty, he added, "And honestly, if I'm in a position to do something good, why wouldn't I?" Leonard was stunned. He'd heard plenty of empty words over the years, promises that led to nothing. But there was something about the way Barron spoke. It carried weight, a sincerity that was hard to ignore. Still, a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. "You don't owe me anything," Leonard said, his voice steadier now. "I've been out here long enough to know. People don't just stop to help without expecting something in return." Barron crouched down again, leveling his gaze with Leonard's. "I don't expect anything," he said, his tone unwavering. "But I do believe that small actions, they can lead to something much bigger." He gestured toward the note still clutched in Leonard's hand. "That place. They have resources, job programs, counseling, whatever you might need. All I'm asking is that you show up." Leonard swallowed hard, feeling a lump rise in his throat. His eyes dropped to the note again, the address written in neat, careful handwriting. He wanted to believe this was real, but after years of disappointment, it was hard to let that hope Indiana. And yet, what if I can't do it? What if I mess it all up? Leonard's voice wavered, doubt creeping in. Barron shook his head with a faint smile. "Everyone messes up, Leonard. But giving up, that's the only way you really lose." The words were simple, yet they struck Leonard with an unexpected weight. For a moment, the chaotic sounds of the city seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet certainty in Barron's voice. The crowd had thickened around them now, their curiosity growing. Phones were raised, recording every second. Somewhere in the murmurs, Leonard caught a whisper. "Is that Barron Trump?" His stomach tightened. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. The weight of so many eyes pressing down on him felt suffocating. But Barron, he remained unfazed. If anything, he seemed to thrive under the pressure, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Leonard's unease. "Ignore them," Barron said softly, as if he could hear Leonard's thoughts. "Right now, this is just about you and me." No one else matters. A strange sense of relief washed over Leonard. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. Someone saw him, really saw him, and cared enough to listen. Leonard exhaled slowly, nodding. His voice, though hesitant at first, steadied. "All right. I'll go. I'll show up." Barron's expression shifted, a genuine smile breaking through. "That's all I wanted to hear." He rose to his feet, dusting off his knees, before glancing at the onlookers. Then, turning back to Leonard, his voice lifted just enough for everyone to hear. "And Leonard, you've got more strength in you than you realize. Don't forget that." Leonard blinked, a rush of gratitude and embarrassment twisting inside him. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. So instead, he just nodded, clutching the note tighter, holding onto it like a lifeline. As Barron turned to leave, the crowd instinctively parted for him, their whispers intensifying. Leonard watched him disappear into the bustling city, his figure blending effortlessly into the sea of people. For the first time in years, Leonard felt a flicker of something he thought was long gone: hope. His gaze dropped back to the note in his hand. This was his first step toward something different, something better. And the next morning, Leonard stood outside the address Barron had given him, a modest brick building, tucked away on a quieter street in Cleveland. A simple sign hung above the entrance: Hope Outreach Resource Center. Through the doors, a steady stream of people filtered in, and some walked out carrying grocery bags, others appeared just as uncertain as Leonard felt. His fingers traced the edges of the note in his pocket, almost as if to reassure himself that this wasn't some dream. The $100 bill was still tucked securely in his jacket. A part of him wanted to hold on to it, to keep it as proof that yesterday had actually happened. But another part, the one stirred by Barron's words, whispered that this wasn't just about the money. It was about the chance to begin again. Taking a deep breath, Leonard stepped inside. Warmth immediately wrapped around him, a sharp contrast to the freezing air outside. Behind the front desk sat a middle-aged woman, her kind eyes and gentle smile making the unfamiliar place feel a little less intimidating. She looked up as he approached. "How can I help you today?" Leonard hesitated, then slowly pulled the note from his pocket and slid it across the counter. Barron sent me. Said I should come here." Her gaze flicked to the paper, and almost instantly, a knowing smile spread across her face. "Ah, you must be Leonard. We've been expecting you." She stood up, motioning for him to follow. "Come on, let's get you started." The next few hours passed in a blur. Leonard sat down with a caseworker who actually listened, without judgment, without pity, just listened. Together, they laid out a plan to help him get back on his feet. He was assigned a temporary bed at the shelter, scheduled for a doctor's appointment to address his health issues, and even connected with a job training program. It was overwhelming, but for the first time in years, it felt like the scattered pieces of his life were finally being picked up and carefully put back together. That evening, as he sat on the edge of his cot, Leonard replayed everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. A stranger's kindness, the offer of help, the simple yet powerful act of being seen. It all felt surreal. He thought about Barron's words, about the promise he had made to help himself. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Leonard believed it was possible. Meanwhile, just outside the shelter, something was happening, something neither he nor Barron could have ever predicted. A video of their interaction, filmed by a bystander, had exploded overnight. It spread across social media like wildfire. Headlines flooded in, all praising the young Trump heir for his unexpected act of generosity. The footage showed Barron kneeling beside Leonard, pressing the bill into his hand. And words of encouragement, spoken in that moment, had struck a chord with millions. Some dismissed it as a publicity stunt, while others saw it as a rare glimpse of genuine compassion from someone in a position of privilege. Regardless of the debates, one thing was undeniable. The video had captured something raw, something powerful. People from all walks of life began reaching out to the Hope Outreach Resource Center, offering donations, support, and resources, all inspired by Barron's actions. Leonard had no idea that his story had become the center of a national conversation. He was too busy focusing on the road ahead, attending his first counseling session, filling out job applications, and slowly learning to believe in himself again. That night, as Leonard laid down, the weight of the past year felt just a little lighter. Somewhere out there, the young man who had stopped to help him was making waves. But Leonard's focus? Simple. Take it one day at a time, and honor the promise he had made. By the end of the week, he started to notice small but meaningful changes, both within himself and the world around him. At the shelter, staff members treated him with a kindness he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just practical support, but also encouragement, a reminder that his story wasn't over yet. Word of his journey spread quietly among the shelter community. Others, who had been struggling in silence, began to approach him, drawn by his willingness to take that first step. "If you can do it, maybe I can too," one man told him, patting him on the back. The gesture was simple, but the feeling it left behind? Powerful. Outside the shelter, however, Leonard's story was no longer quiet. The video of his interaction with Barron Trump had exploded across social media, racking up millions of views in just a matter of days. News outlets picked it up, dissecting every detail. Commentators debated, was Barron's act of kindness genuine or performative? Meanwhile, viewers across the country shared their own thoughts. Privilege with a purpose, one tweet read. This is how you use it for good. Another post stated, it's sad that kindness like this is so rare that it shocks us. But kudos to Barron for reminding us it's possible. Leonard only found out about the attention when a staff member at the shelter showed him the video. Watching himself on screen, he felt a strange mix of emotions, embarrassment, gratitude, and something he couldn't quite name. The man in the video? He barely recognized him. The hollow eyes. The defeated posture. It was a reminder of how far he had fallen, and perhaps how far he could rise. Meanwhile, Barron stayed silent amidst the growing buzz. No interviews. No public statements. No engagement with the online noise. Because to him, this wasn't about praise. It was about Leonard. Behind the scenes, Barron made sure that the shelter received significant donations, enough to expand its programs to truly help even more people like Leonard. But what neither of them expected was the movement that followed. Inspired by Barron's simple act, people across the country began sharing their own moments of kindness. Social media flooded with hashtags like #KindnessChallenge and #PayItForward. Local shelters reported surges in donations. Volunteer numbers skyrocketed. One small gesture had set off a ripple effect, far greater than anyone could have imagined. For Leonard, that ripple became deeply personal. One evening, as he sat in the shelter's common room, a man approached him, his face strangely familiar. "Leonard?" the man asked hesitantly. Leonard squinted, trying to place him. Then it clicked. Paul. His voice trembled. His younger brother. The one he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The two men stared at each other, the weight of lost years thick in the air between them. "I saw the video," Paul admitted, sitting beside him. I didn't know things had gotten so bad for you. I should have reached out sooner." Leonard shook his head, fighting back tears. "It's not your fault. I didn't exactly make it easy for anyone to find me." Paul placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Well, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." The reunion was bittersweet, a reminder of all that had been lost, but also of what could still be rebuilt. For Leonard, it was another step, not just toward healing his circumstances, but his relationships, and perhaps most importantly, his sense of self. As the weeks passed, he began to see his story differently, not as a tragedy, but as proof of resilience. And though the road ahead was long, he carried with him something more valuable than money: hope. And if this story of resilience and kindness has inspired you, remember, every small gesture matters. Be part of the change. Subscribe to Alex's Stories for more powerful tales that celebrate the human spirit, inspire compassion, and remind us all of the impact we can make. Let's continue to spread hope together.